All right, continuing on with part two, we're going to have two very brief meetings, and then we're going to get into section 86 as we have it today. So the first meeting, again, these are very brief. This is at the beginning of December 1832, kind of wintertime here, where Noah Packard is ordained as a priest in the church, and that was performed by Joseph Smith. So he was ordained to be a priest, which is the highest level of the Aaronic priesthood, technically speaking, although a bishop is still in there. And then the next thing we get is a 5th of December, so 2 days later, early December, in 1832, where Solomon Humphrey kind of came to the prophet and said, I wanted to know the will of God for him. And it was called on a mission commencing in Parkman, and Noah Packard is supposed to be his companion. And then they go where the Spirit directs them. So they go to this place called Parkman, and then from there, apparently it doesn't really matter where they go, and the Spirit directs them. And so Solomon Humphrey and Noah Packard are mission companions. And that's kind of a rare little moment where there's just kind of one thing after another, with Noah Packard being a priest at the time. So that was interesting. And then the next thing we get is going to be section 86 of the Doctrine and Covenants. Now, the earliest copy that we have is in Revelation Book 2, so this is Frederick G. Williams' handwriting. And we get a small contribution from Joseph Smith right at the beginning where it says, to go into the covenants, written instructions. So that means that this made it into the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. So that was Joseph Smith's own hand. Takes up 2 pages. We also get a copy in Sidney Gilbert's notebook, and it is called by him The Parable of the Wheat and Tares. And that's what this section is all about, is interpreting the parable of the wheat and tares. Revelation Book 1 has a copy with instructions given at the end. With introductions given at the end, which is a little bit of a difference. So, there's a kind of a, hey, revelation at this time or whatever. And then the revelation happens. And at the very end of that, it says, Kirtland Mills, December 6, 1832, given by Joseph the seer and written by Sidney Rigdon, the scribe and counselor, and transcribed by Frederick G. Williams, assistant scribe and counselor, and copied by Orson Hyde, the clerk of the presidency, and recorded by John Whitmer by the Lord's clerk. Don't you forget it. So, kind of an interesting thing where the explanation of what this is all about is given at the end. So that's Revelation Book 1. It does make it into the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, as I said before, as Section 6. So this is close to the front, which means it was kind of deemed a little bit more important. And we get a copy of this in the manuscript history, which we will get to in a second. So some introductions to Section 86. Revelation Book 2, our most original copy, gives us this. It says, a revelation explaining the parable of the wheat and the tares. That's it. The rest of the introduction is given at the very end. It says, Kirtland, December 6th, A.D., 1832, given by Joseph the seer and written by Sidney Rigdon, the scribe and counselor, and transcribed by Frederick G. Williams, assistant scribe and counselor. And that's what you get from that. Gilbert's notebook simply gives parable of wheat and tares. Revelation Book 1 has the exact same thing as Revelation Book 2, so no difference there. Doctrine and Covenants, it's simple, but it does spell out it is on priesthood. So this is a very specific thing there for the Doctrine and Covenants. Manuscript history doesn't give a whole lot. It says, on the 6th of December, 1832, I received the following revelation explaining the parable of the wheat and the tares on priesthood. And away we go. And there is no difference in the modern section headings to this. So what we're going to have to get is our rest of our detail from the historical introduction of the Joseph Smith papers. Historical introduction says this. Joseph Smith wrote in his journal that on the 6th of December, 1832, he spent part of the day translating or working on his revision of the Bible. It is not known whether he was working that day on the New Testament revision or the Old Testament revision, but on that same day, he, quote, received a revelation explaining the parable of the wheat and the tares. It's actually spelled tears, hopefully not tears, found in Matthew 13, suggesting that they may have been working on the New Testament. When Joseph Smith worked on that parable more than a year earlier while revising the New Testament, he made few significant changes. And most of those changes, by the way, are having to do with the order of operations. Like, do you gather the wheat and then gather the tares and then throw one in the one place and the other and burn them? And, that is the sort of changes that were made. So in this case, what Joseph Smith said is like, hey, the wheat's going to be gathered out. The tares are going to be left behind. Anything left behind is just going to be burned with the rest of the field. That's the major change there. So further into the historical introduction, we get, at some point, Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon changed the text of Matthew 13:30, which Joseph Smith had originally left intact, from, I will say to the reapers, gather ye together first the tares, to, gather ye together first the wheat into my barn, and the tares are bound in bundles to be burned. This inverted order followed the eschatological sequence of events outlined in a November 1831 revelation. The righteous were to flee to Zion and Jerusalem, leaving the wicked nations behind. So, a little bit of a difference there. So if you're not moving towards Zion, you might be in trouble, sort of idea. Footnotes in the introduction say this: an August 1831 revelation maintained the original order, with the tares being first gathered and then the wheat. That revelation explained that the wicked would be plucked out when Christ returned, implying that the righteous would remain. So that's what we get from the historical introduction and some changes that were made to a very, very important parable of the wheat and the tares. So content and footnotes for this are interesting. So just to kind of give a sense, a little bit of what this thing is all about. If you're not familiar with this parable, the parable of the wheat and the tares says that, at the last days, actually, it's just kind of like the sower soweth the field, and sowers go out and they sow wheat in this field, and then the enemy comes and plants tares. Now, tares are weeds that are also, I believe, poisonous to eat. So it's very dangerous to have those in with your crop. Then they want to reap the fields, and he says, hey, oh man, the enemy's done this, look at what they've done. And he says, well, if you pull the tares out, you're also going to uproot all the wheat, and the whole harvest is going to be destroyed. So just wait for a little while, let them grow together, and then when the time of harvest has come, it'll be easy to know who's who. You will, reap down the field, and the tares will be burned, and the wheat will survive. And of course, Joseph Smith sort of made a little change there. That is the original New Testament story. The interpretation of the wheat and tares, this revelation we're talking about here, gives the following. So the field that we're talking about is actually the world. The apostles are the sowers of the seed. Now, this is a New Testament verse, so I would say that those apostles, like back with Jesus Christ, are the sowers of the seed. Satan comes along and his followers and whatnot, and they sow in the tares. They sow in things that look like they're righteous, but they're actually poisonous weeds, right? The angels are the one that wants to reap down the fields. And this is the interesting part for me. The Lord kind of says, don't do that unless you hurt the wheat with the tares, because your faith is weak, which I find very interesting. So there's a bit of growth for everyone here. And it could be that the angels are the current apostles or current missionaries or anybody who's involved in this. They don't really say. So then at the end of this particular interpretation, in this, it says they're going to gather the good. They're going to put them in a place of safety, basically. And anything that's left over is either bound or left, and the entire field will be burned. So the whole world will burn with fire, which is a very sort of apocalyptical second coming style language, that the earth will be burned. So that is the interpretation of it. So then we get a few things specifically from footnotes to this. So the Revelation gives us this: in whose hearts the enemy, even Satan, sitteth to reign. Behold, he soweth the tares, wherefore the tares, which is tares, choke the wheat and drive the church into the wilderness. Footnote 5 to this says, Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 through 6, recounts John's vision of a woman crowned with 12 stars who fled into the wilderness because she was persecuted by the dragon. Joseph Smith's revision of that passage stated that, quote, the woman was the church of God, unquote. An October 1830 revelation used the same imagery of the church being in the wilderness. The one-word answer to this that we call it today is the apostasy. So the idea is that the apostles were killed, the authority was gone, and the church was sort of driven into the wilderness, and nobody really had the whole truth during the apostasy before Joseph Smith performed the restoration, is the story here. Further into the text we get, behold, verily I say unto you, the angels are crying unto the Lord day and night, who are ready and waiting to be sent forth to reap down the fields. But the Lord saith unto them, pluck not up the tares, while the blade is yet tender, for verily your faith is weak. lest you destroy the wheat also. Therefore, let the wheat and the tares grow together until the harvest is fully ripe. Then ye shall first gather out the wheat from among the tares, and after the gathering of the wheat, behold, and lo, the tares are bound in bundles, and the field remaineth to be burned. So, footnote 6 to this says, in 1830, Joseph Smith explained that this passage meant that, quote, the wicked must soon be destroyed from off the face of the earth, for the Lord hath spoken it, unquote. Similarly, a January 1831 revelation warned that, quote, the angels are waiting the great command to reap down the earth, to gather the tares, that they may be burned, unquote. And further to this, further footnote 7, the next footnote we get from this says, speaking of the time when Christ would return to the earth, Joseph Smith's 30th of August 1831 revelation explained that, quote, at the hour cometh an entire separation of the righteous and the wicked, and in that day will I send mine angels and pluck out the wicked and cast into unquenchable fire, unquote. So there you go. A bit of brutal language, but a lot coming from the New Testament about the interpretation, the symbolism of what the wheat and tares means. Now, we just had this with the book of Revelations. I believe that was section 77 as we have it today, of saying, what does this book mean? What does this mean? What does that mean? Whatever. And anyway, this is another instance of that. So that's part 2. Stick around for part 3. We're going to be getting into a prediction and a prophecy about the American Civil War that winds up happening, I would say, what is it, about 18 years after Joseph Smith is killed. So this is a very interesting section and something that is very widely shared. So stick around.